I wanted to point out to all these great lovers and supporters of the Pennsylvania legislature that it was the Republican Pennsylvania legislature that passed a Republican bill that they all voted for and supported that set up the system under which we just ran the election, and that the reason the president lost was because he was not as popular as other Republicans in our state. He got fewer votes than all of them. I wanted to lay out all this evidence, Madam Speaker, because I thought it was a sign of respect for my colleagues, for all the Americans out there who don't know who to trust. I was raised on that. I was raised on that respect, which makes this a hard speech for me to give. Because to do this with any kind of honesty means admitting and declaring in this House that these objections don't deserve an ounce of respect. Not an ounce. A woman died out there tonight, and you're making these objections. Let's be clear about what happened in this chamber today. Invaders came in for the first time since the War of 1812. They desecrated these halls and this chamber and practically every inch of ground where we work. And for the most part, they walked in here free. A lot of them walked out free. And there wasn't a person watching at home who didn't know why that was, because of the way that they look.
House will be in order.
The courts rejected these claims, including all-star judges whom the president himself has nominated. Every election, we know, features some illegality and irregularity, and of course, that's unacceptable. I support strong state-led voting reforms. Last year's bizarre pandemic procedures must not become the new norm. But my colleagues, nothing before us proves illegality anywhere near the massive scale that would have tipped the entire election. Nor can public doubt alone justify a radical break when the doubt itself was incited without any evidence. The Constitution gives us here in Congress a limited role. We cannot simply declare ourselves a national board of elections on steroids. The voters, the courts, and the states have all spoken. They've all spoken. If we overrule them, it would damage our republic forever. This election actually was not unusually close. Just in recent history, 1976, 2000, and 2004 were all closer than this one. The Electoral College margin is almost identical to what it was in 2016. If this election were overturned by mere allegations from the losing side, our democracy would enter a death spiral. We'd never see the whole nation accept an election again. Every 4 years would be a scramble for power at any cost. The Electoral College, which most of us on this side have been defending for years, would cease to exist, leaving many of our states with no real say at all in choosing a president. The effects would go even beyond the elections themselves. Self-government, my colleagues, requires a shared commitment to the truth and a shared respect for the ground rules of our system. We cannot keep drifting apart into two separate tribes with a separate set of facts and separate realities, with nothing in common except our hostility towards each other and mistrust for the few national institutions that we all still share. Every time in the last 30 years that Democrats have lost a presidential race, they've tried a challenge just like this. After 2000, after 2004, after 2016. After 2004, a senator joined and forced the same debate. And believe it or not, Democrats like Harry Reid, Dick Durbin, and Hillary Clinton praised them and applauded the stunt. Republicans condemned those baseless efforts back then. And we just spent 4 years condemning Democrats' shameful attacks on the validity of President Trump's own election. So look, there can be no double standard. The media that is outraged today spent 4 years aiding and abetting Democrats' attacks on our institutions after they lost. But we must not imitate and escalate what we repudiate. Our duty is to govern for the public good. The United States Senate has a higher calling than an endless spiral of partisan vengeance. Congress will either override the voters, overrule them, the voters, the states, and the courts for the first time ever, or honor the people's decision. Will either guarantee Democrats' delegitimizing efforts after 2016 become a permanent new routine for both sides, or declare that our nation deserves a lot better than this. We'll either hasten down a poisonous path where only the winners of election actually accept the results, or show we can still muster the patriotic courage that our forebears showed not only in victory but in defeat. The framers built the Senate to stop short-term passions from boiling over and melting the foundations of our republic. So I believe protecting our constitutional order requires respecting the limits of our own power. It would be unfair and wrong to disenfranchise American voters and overrule the courts and the states on this extraordinarily thin basis. And I will not pretend such a vote would be a harmless protest gesture while relying on others to do the right thing. I will vote to respect the people's decision and defend our system of government as we know it.
We need to do something. My challenge today is not about the good people of Arizona.
Senate will stand in recess until the call of the chair.
We'll pause.
Protesters are in the building.
Thank you.
There wasn't anything you said.
And the President of the United States has encouraged his supporters
in the direction of the police.
Say that again, Chris. I missed you. Say that again.
Nora, it looks like that OC spray, that pepper spray that was used was fired in the direction of the police, not actually perhaps by one of the protesters. It's It's an odd situation right now. We just saw moments ago somebody walk by with a Capitol Police shield who wasn't a police officer. Now you see the police moving to a different position. So this is continuing to escalate here outside the Capitol.
Understood. It appears that there is tear gas being used on what are the inaugural steps in the inaugural stage. And as you can see, the supporters mounting a Trump 2020 flag from where Joe Biden will be inaugurated just 2 weeks from now at O'Keefe.
Yeah, that is inside the chambers right now, by the way. It looks as if one of our producers there says the House is actually back in recess and members have been told to stay seated. Over in the Senate, where reporters aren't even allowed to have their phones in the chamber, but one of ours does, Capitol Police have told senators to stay away from the doors in the Senate chamber. They are instructed to stay put. Many of them are on their phones down in the well. They escorted out Vice President Pence, who is in the line of succession, who obviously is a more high-profile leader who brings with him much more protection when he comes to the Capitol. Other senators are still in the chamber. In fact, one aide is now just telling me this, guys, over a text, that members are being told to, quote, get under the chairs in the House chamber. This is a aide to a member of Congress who tells me again, members are being told, quote, get under the chairs in the House chamber. You might be wondering, why can't we show you images of that? Because every time the House goes into recess, they turn off the cameras. And so...
The situation has reached a dire point where the U.S. Capitol is now in lockdown. Both the House and Senate, which are tasked with, according to U.S. code, to count the electoral votes. That is the final step in the processing of Joe Biden as the next president of the United States. After being incited into violence by the president, the current president, Donald Trump, the supporters have now stormed the United States Capitol. The mayor of the District of Columbia has just issued an extraordinary curfew, 6 p.m. tonight, that will no doubt be enforced has to be enforced by the Guard. The Secretary of the Army has previously signed an order that more than 300 National Guard soldiers would assist the District of Columbia. No word at this point whether that number has been increased or whether there is an ask for additional National Guard soldiers. This is the nightmare scenario. This is the reason that 10 former secretaries of defense who have served both Republican and Democratic presidents unitely under the direction of Dick Cheney, who by many liberals and Democrats is considered a pariah, actually pushed to have them do this, to say the military will not get involved. It should not get involved in our electoral process. But this type of antagonizing event brings real nervousness among all the powers of government because of the concern about what it suggests. This is a democracy. Protest is protected and allowed, but violence is not. And there are concerns among a number of officials about how these images will be used by our foreign adversaries about what's happening. Hold on, we have Zach Hudak on the phone. Zach, tell us what you're seeing.
Just in the House chamber where they just evacuated us and took a good ways from it. But on the way out, there were what we believe were protesters who were trying to knock in sort of the center doors in that chamber. Security placed a large cabinet in front of it and were holding it shut and had guns drawn and aimed at the door. And shortly before they took us out, we were able to hear what appeared to be a gunshot or some other kind of loud bang. Members and press were given gas masks because Capitol Police said that tear gas had been used around the recumbent area of the Capitol.
Hey, Zach, this is Major Garrett. Nora stepped away for just a second, so let me engage you, if I could, for just a moment. What are you doing and seeing as you are right now, and where, if you can, I know that you are under some requirements not to be too specific, but if you can give a general sense of where you are and what's happening immediately around you, do you feel in danger in any sense?
I do not. We're being taken to a safe area and moved very efficiently by the Capitol Police, who were extremely on top of things. the only point at which I think everyone got a little bit nervous was when there was that literal banging, trying to knock in the doors that were being held by the cabinet.
Do you have any? Security. Go ahead, Ed, jump in.
Zach, take us back to what was going on in the House chamber itself. There are conflicting reports about whether guns were drawn and used or whether there were other barricades put in place to keep people out. What can you tell us, having been in the room?
I can tell you that guns were drawn. They were handguns, and there were, I believe, 2 of them from
by whom?
Security or Capitol Police. They were pointed out that door that, as I said, protesters were trying to knock in. We did hear what appeared to be a gunshot in the distance. It was some kind of loud bang. And there was just kind of general commotion. I think that, like, as soon as that door started getting knocked, everyone, the members and their staff, completed forward and, we're trying to get out of there as soon as possible.
And from your vantage point, Zach, in the House chamber, did you see anyone injured or hurt in any way?
No.
Okay.
No.
And there were still members in the chamber when this happened, correct? Members of Congress?
There were. There were, but they were taken out sort of as soon as you started being able to hear noises right outside. And the press was taken out shortly after.
Earlier in the proceedings, was the Speaker of the House still presiding?
She was.
And was she escorted out first?
I believe so, but from where I was sitting in the gallery, I couldn't tell for certain. I believe the first one to be taken out was Representative Hoyer when there was
the majority leader.
House majority leader, sorry.
And Zach, the members who had objected, some 100 members, they did not want to stay inside the House chamber?
They did not. And in fact, as we went into lockdown, one man who was sitting up on the other side of the gallery looking down pulled off his mask and started yelling to them, tell the president to call this off or something along those lines. He was sort of hushed up pretty quickly, but there was certainly blame put on them, at least from one guy in the room.
Let's bring in Nancy Cordes, who is still on Capitol Hill. Nancy?
And Nora, the House Minority Leader, Republican Kevin McCarthy, confirmed just a few minutes ago that shots have been fired inside the Capitol building. He didn't say by whom. It's not clear whether he knows by whom, but multiple reporters have said that they've seen at least one person being carried out of the Capitol on a stretcher, covered in what appeared to be blood. So, we don't know if that was a protester or a police officer. Obviously, this is a completely fluid event. And take a look at this. This is the crypt of the U.S. Capitol. And what you're looking at is essentially hand-to-hand combat between Capitol police officers and these protesters who appear to be trying to storm that area of the Capitol as police officers try to keep them back. That area is called the crypt because it was originally designed to be the final resting place for George Washington before he decided that actually he would rather be laid to rest at his beloved Mount Vernon. But it is an area on the first floor of the Capitol, and I'm just speculating here, but it's likely that police were trying to keep the protesters out of this area because there are spaces in the bowels of the Capitol where lawmakers can be taken to be kept safe. And police probably didn't want these protesters getting any closer to the basement of the Capitol than they already were.
John, when you incite it by suggesting weeks ago that it's going to be a wild one, can you just tweet it away? Can you just put all this stuff back in a bottle and expect it to disappear?
You can't do that any more than you could during the rallies in 2015 and 2016 when the president would encourage his supporters to take care of, by physical force, those who showed up at his rallies and protested. This isn't just happening today. This is a long history of consistent behavior by the president, and so this comes in as the last ugly sentence in a long series of chapters between the president and this kind of behavior. This is just the ugliest manifestation of it.
The president invited tens of thousands of people to quote-unquote stop the steal. I don't know if you heard his more than hour-long remarks or the remarks of his son, who was the wind-up. It was some heated stuff, Leader McCarthy. I just wonder whether someone is going to accurately call a spade a spade. And I'm giving you the opportunity right now that your precious and beloved United States Capitol, and our democracy is witnessing this. Call a spade a spade.
I was very clear with the president when I called him. This has to stop, and he's got to go to the American public and tell them to stop this. This is not who we are. This is not who his supporters are. This is more than politics. This is the foundation of this nation. This is the democracy that we are supposed to be the torch for the rest of the world. This is not the view we should see, and nobody should encourage it, and nobody should be a part of it.
But we have gone far beyond rhetoric. We have gone to incitement. We've gone to occupation. We've gone to a place of, I think it's fair to say, astonishment.
Yeah.
These are images we never expected to see in our great country. A cleavage, a ripping apart of the sense of what government is, what it's meant to accomplish, and how it is sanctified in every presidential election. And that's what is now being torn apart before our very eyes, or there is an attempt to tear it apart before our very eyes.
The situation has turned violent on Capitol Hill. It has led to some serious injuries as well as gunshots being fired. And I think that's why so many who love this Capitol so
This was earlier.
This is the person who was apparently wounded by gunshot. We want to warn you that there is blood.
But this was inside the United States Capitol this afternoon in the wake of this violence and unrest.
I'm going to stay safe inside, but I'll call you back.
And this is video from inside the House chamber earlier. So this, where this is being shot from, is actually the side of the House chamber where the First Lady normally sits.
Yes, correct.
During a State of the Union. There you can see members of Congress. That's Pramila Jayapal.
Pramila Jayapal from Washington, correct.
Remember, there you go. And you can.
There's the gunshot.
Let's listen. That's a police officer there, obviously.
Capitol Police officer, yep.
And that woman there is a member of Congress. I tried to make out who exactly.
She appears to be making a video or a statement because she's giving somewhat of a speech. And praying.
She's praying. She is praying.
And there were a lot of prayers said today, not only on Capitol Hill, but across America for the state of our...
And that...
Everybody stay down, shouts a member of Congress inside the hallowed halls of our United States Congress.
And that's not a shower cap. That's the kind of mask that are under the seats.
Protective, yes.
In the event of some kind of chemical agent being released in the chamber. So remember, we reported earlier that members had been instructed to use the gas masks under their seats and have them ready, or to shelter under their chairs. And this is the video showing that, in fact, many did do that. And in fact, as he speaks this afternoon, we've seen governors across the country issue statements condemning this. Mike DeWine, the governor of Ohio.
Right.
Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida. They're both Republicans.
Correct.
Larry Hogan a little while ago, Ralph Northam of Virginia. But I just sit here, guys, and watch this and say, this doesn't happen here. The next president isn't supposed to tell the current one to clean up the violence in the streets and to condemn it. My mother from Central America texted me a little while ago. She says, we see this in Venezuela and Nicaragua. We don't see this here in the United States. And she's got a point. And I know a lot of people watching right now at home are thinking the same thing. And it's just incredible to think that we are no different now in that regard than some of these other countries who struggled with these kinds of transitions. This is what everyone feared, that watches and monitors this closely, that we've all spoken to since the election in November. But this kind of unrest causing a disruption like this.
Once again, the president making unsubstantiated claims of a fraudulent election that even his outgoing Attorney General William Barr said was not true, as well as both Republican leaders in the House and the Senate have obviously said it is not true. It was not a fraudulent election. So let's make that clear. The president also saying, go home. You know, this really speaks to how detached he is from reality. And the reason is because the president gets to travel by private plane and for 4 years has been able to travel by helicopter. You know, I had people tell me, all these people have traveled in on commercial air flights. They're booked in hotel rooms for tonight in the District of Columbia. They're not people of extreme wealth. This is a big outgoing for them. It's their Disneyland of a big event of the year when people are strapped for cash in an economic time. They've made the decision and make this their moment. And so just to say go home, it doesn't work that way.
They go back to their hotels.
They're going to stay here in the District of Columbia and continue the rage that is been fueled within them by rhetoric for months. And that's something that the president has stoked for months. And he continues to in this message by once again noting about a fraudulent election.
It is an arm's length relationship.
I rise up for myself and 60 of my colleagues to object to the counting of the electoral ballots from Arizona.
Is the objection in writing and signed by a senator?
Yes, it is.
It is.
Let me be very clear. The scenes of chaos at the Capitol do not reflect a true America, do not represent who we are. What we're seeing are a small number of extremists dedicated to lawlessness. This is not dissent. It's disorder. It's chaos. It borders on sedition. And it must end now.
We're keeping a very close eye on what's going on here at the Capitol. We're watching this extraordinary video of protesters who've breached the entrance. They've gotten inside the Capitol building. They're on the steps. They're not supposed to be there. Is this an amazing sort of level of tolerance? I'm sort of wondering why this is being tolerated in the Capitol and why, you know, we've seen protesters pushed back before, and I'm wondering whether we're thinking that this is such a volatile situation that security forces may be just allowing it to play out, or what would you imagine is happening here?
Well, keep in mind, over the summer we did see peaceful protesters in front of the White House who were basically bullied by federal law enforcement. That was in a public space. Your First Amendment rights are not the same in certain spaces. So if this is a sort of a secure situation, as Siobhan indicated, that is in the Capitol, there is no First Amendment right to barge in that way. So it is unusual that we're not seeing law enforcement step up to the plate the way happened over the summer and in cities like Portland when it came to Black Lives Matter protests. But this is, I think this is one of those moments in American history that hopefully we will never see again. We've never seen it before. So we have to have, I think, a little leeway for law enforcement trying to figure out triage. We've got members of Congress that are potentially at risk. We have the vice president with a target on his back in this moment because the president of the United States has been building up to this moment with his supporters now for weeks, encouraging people to come and to protest in this moment. So it is a bit unusual that D.C. local police weren't ready for this. But I just have to hope that no one gets hurt because we know that people within the Trump camp are heavily armed. There are strong anti-gun laws in the nation's capital. But of course, not everyone has to be checked to cross the border from Virginia or Maryland into Washington, D.C.
Where do you place the blame?
The blame for this is Donald Trump. He is the one that has been spreading conspiracy theories, falsehoods. He is the one who is pressuring governors of states like Georgia and secretaries of state of states like Georgia to find him missing votes. He is the one that is rejecting their results of this election, which have been certified by all 50 governors. It is this president who has incited his supporters to this violence. And even as he did just now, spend barely a minute telling people to go home, he continued to spread lies about the election. This is Donald Trump's fault. He is truly responsible for this today, and it is shameful. I would never in my entire adult life, serving both first in the Army and now in the legislative branch, would ever imagine that it is the President of the United States of America who would be the one to incite violence and have people storm the steps of the United States Capitol. Never would I imagine that this could possibly happen. But it did today. But you know what? Democracy will prevail. We will not be deterred by this unruly mob. We will continue to move forward and follow the guidance of our Constitution and make sure that we carry out the will of the American people. And then we need to get to work, and we need to come together, Democrats and Republicans, and get help to working families and fight this pandemic and get our economy moving again. And we can only do that together as partners. But we have to get through tonight first.
I mean, this was absolute insanity. I mean, this was Banana Republic territory, and it's unacceptable. And I think I've opposed the objection from the start on constitutional grounds, but I think the fundamental problem that no one wanted to say out loud is that the objectors thought that they could have a debate, raise awareness to voter, fraud issues or voting irregularities. But because they wouldn't actually achieve their objective, they all knew that they had no chance of actually overturning the election, but they could have it both ways. But the problem is they gave a lot of people false hope, and they got a lot of people fired up, and now we're seeing the consequences of that play out. And this is just absolutely unacceptable. The president needs to call it off. These people need to stand down. I mean, this is America. This is the United States Capitol. And we're sitting here with our walls barricaded, our doors barricaded. Someone was shot at the U.S. Capitol. The closest thing that I can think of that this reminds me of is the time I spent in Iraq in 2007 and 2008.
Chip, I must ask you, were you injured at all in this fracas? Were any of our colleagues injured? And where were the police? Where were the police? Did you have any sense that you could or would be protected?
There were no police around us. We were on our own. In fact, I remember one of the protesters standing next to me said, "The police don't care about you guys. They're only protecting the senators. You're on your own, buddy." And so we hightailed it out of there. They were absolutely ferociously angry at the media, I must say, picking out some of the media enterprises by name. And it was a scary moment, I've got to say. I had a flak jacket and a helmet with me. The last time I wore a flak jacket and a helmet, a whole series of times, was when I spent a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it is so disturbing to have to wear a helmet and a flak jacket on the grounds of the United States Capitol.
But the process was to play out. The first state that was contested was Arizona. The debate had just begun shortly after 2 p.m. Eastern. In the middle of the speech from Jim Langford, Republican from Oklahoma in the Senate, who supports challenging the electoral votes from Arizona, the Senate chamber was evacuated, as was the House, because these protesters stormed the Capitol, breached security barriers, and entered in such a way and with such what appeared to be menacing intent that the Capitol Police felt it was incumbent upon them to rapidly remove the Vice President of the United States, the senators, and eventually members of the House.
And here
that's what was supposed to go on. That's what did happen, and it is now in abeyance because of these occupiers of the United States Capitol.
And Ed, you were just noting this window that is being crawled through right now.
Yes, there were protesters there crawling into the Capitol. There we go, right there.
The windows that overlook the west front of the Capitol high up like that and have a balcony are usually leadership offices. Am I correct?
If we could, we'd have to have a wider view of this shot to know exactly which window that is. But the fact that they're able to do this at all just shows you the lack of coherent law enforcement response. The fact that there is still
an ability to repel them,
and that there's still a danger to those inside, and that this has not yet been resolved and is nowhere near being resolved.
No.
Let's listen into this.
We got a small criminal class that's running this country. Y'all don't give in, man. You stand with us. You don't go to church on Sundays. You got a big good guys. Let's go. Love you guys. We still support you.
These supporters of the president, but supporters of Jesus gathered as well, concerned about and protesting, which is a right, but this has gone beyond protesting, as has now placed the lives of law enforcement and others in danger, as well as the destruction to our federal property and disrupted the work of lawmakers and diligent public servants.
And you heard, Nora, the audience heard one of the protesters as he walked away say there's a small criminal class that runs this country. That is an embedded grievance that Donald Trump did not invent, let us be honest. But as a candidate and as president, he has pointed to and suggested is real and is given a sense to these people who held that grievance that it's real. And he's the only alternative to it.
Listen just a minute.
We have the power, and you guys are getting pushed down. You guys don't want us with your weapons.
And we should tip our hats to the D.C. police, who frankly have put up with a lot of this over the past year, whether it's pro or anti-Trump supporters, the Black Lives Matter protests that were held. This is a police force that has been worn pretty thin and worked pretty hard dealing with situations like this across the nation's capital for last.
We should update. We have some breaking news and some sad news to share with you. CBS News has learned that the woman who was shot earlier inside the Capitol has died, per law enforcement. It is not clear who that woman is, but we showed you that disturbing video earlier that she has sadly passed. And so this violent mob that has led to a confrontation with law enforcement and Capitol Police has led to at least one death, multiple arrests, and also multiple others transported to hospitals for a number of different injuries. But we have that update for you at this hour. Where did you stay securely after all of this happened?
Well, I'm still where we were taken, but we're not at liberty to disclose where we are. There's about 300 to 400 of us in one location, and we've been here ever since we were evacuated.
And all of you are packed in there together?
Yes.
Are you concerned about coronavirus?
Very much so. It's what I would call a COVID super spreader event. About half of the people in the room are not wearing masks, even though they've been offered surgical masks. They've refused to wear them.
Who are these people?
People from the Republican delegation. Not all of them, by any means. I don't mean to suggest that they all have, but some of the newer members from this that are freshmen this year are openly flaunting that they will not wear a mask and refusing to put a mask on.
And just as a reminder, Congresswoman, are all members of Congress required to be tested?
We're not required to be tested, but testing is readily available every day that Congress is in session. And most of us take advantage of that, at least when we first get to D.C. and before we go back to our respective districts.
So you predict a number of lawmakers may contract coronavirus after this event?
I'm not going to predict anything, but it's certainly exactly this kind of situation that we've been told by the medical doctors not to be in. Close proximity, especially with people that aren't wearing masks. I mean, we weren't even allowed to get together with our families for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and now we're in a room with people who are flaunting the rules and very much crowded in here.
We've fulfilled this solemn duty every 4 years for more than 2 centuries. Whether our nation's been at war or at peace, under all manner of threats, even during an ongoing armed rebellion and the Civil War, the clockwork of our democracy has carried on. The United States and the United States Congress have faced down much greater threats than the unhinged crowd we saw today. We've never been deterred before and will be not deterred today. They tried to disrupt our democracy. They failed. They failed. They failed to attempt to obstruct the Congress. This failed insurrection only underscores how crucial the task before us is for our republic.
I want to be very clear. Those who perform these reprehensible acts cannot be called protesters. No, these were rioters and insurrectionists, goons and thugs, domestic terrorists. They do not represent America. They were a few thousand violent extremists who tried to take over the Capitol building and attack our democracy. They must and should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, hopefully by this administration, if not, certainly by the next. They should be provided no leniency.
Ronald Reagan once said, "Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means." The peaceful people in my state in Oklahoma want their questions answered, but they don't want this, what happened today. They want to do the right thing, and they also want to do it the right way. They want to honor the constitutional process, but they also want to have debate about election security because they want to make sure it's right, which is why it's an important issue that still needs to be resolved. Transparency in government just doesn't seem like a bad idea. Obviously, the commission that we have asked for is not going to happen at this point, and I understand that. And we're headed towards tonight, towards the certification of Joe Biden to be the President of the United States. And we will work together in this body to be able to set a peaceful example for the days ahead. I yield the floor.
When I arrived in Washington this morning, I fully intended to object to the certification of the electoral votes. However, the events that have transpired today have forced me to reconsider, and I cannot now in good conscience object to the certification of these electors. The violence, the lawlessness, and siege of the halls of Congress are abhorrent and stand as a direct attack on the very institution my objection was intended to protect, the sanctity of the American democratic process. And I thank law enforcement for keeping us safe. I believe that there were last-minute changes to the November 2020 election process and serious irregularities that resulted in too many Americans losing confidence not only in the integrity of our elections, but in the power of the ballot as a tool of democracy. Too many Americans are frustrated at what they see as an unfair system. Nevertheless, there is no excuse for the events that took place in these chambers today, and I pray that America never suffers such a dark day again. Though the fate of this vote is clear, the future of the American people's faith in the core institution of this democracy remains uncertain. We as a body must turn our focus to protecting the integrity of our elections and restoring every American's faith that their voice and their vote matters. America is a divided country with serious differences, but it is still the greatest country on earth. There can be no disagreement that upholding democracy is the only path to preserving our republic. I yield the floor.
Been quite a development, an unforeseen development. CBS News has now reported there are discussions underway about the future of President Trump and occupying the Oval Office. I want to bring in Margaret Brennan, who is the moderator of Face the Nation, who has this new reporting. Margaret, what can you tell us?
Nora, this is not news that we deliver lightly, and I want to make clear that what I'm explaining here is what is being discussed. whispered about among some cabinet members today, and that is whether to move forward with formal proceedings to try to invoke the 25th Amendment. That would allow for the removal of President Trump from office and for Vice President Mike Pence to effectively become commander-in-chief for the remaining days of the Trump presidency. My sources are telling me it has not been formally presented to the vice president. This is not about to happen. It is, however, being discussed right now. The very fact that the highest levels of the U.S. government and cabinet members are discussing this is quite newsworthy, quite notable, and it underscores the moment that we are at. I just want to make clear, this is not just political watchers. These are not just Democratic lawmakers who had been speculating all day that this should happen. I'm talking about actual members of the cabinet. Now, we have further reporting to do to try to pin down where each cabinet member is, where their thinking is at the moment. We know for most of the day the National Security Advisor, for example, was not at the president's side, but was rather traveling in Florida on previously scheduled travel down to troops in Miami area. We know that the president's son-in-law recently arrived back at the White House within the past few hours. But in terms of each cabinet member, what their thinking is, whether they think it is necessary at this moment to take these actions, that is where I am most focused in trying to get a read. But it is extraordinary. The vice president himself, remember, was put in harm's way today by these pro-Trump supporters when they stormed the Capitol, and he had to seek safety and shelter along with congressional leadership. So these events of the past 2 days, including what happened with that key race, Senate race, being lost in terms of the Republican control of the Senate, has caused a real rethinking among some Republican leaders about what the future of this waning few days of the Trump presidency should look like.
And Margaret, let's discuss exactly what the 25th Amendment entails. Ed O'Keefe has luckily brought earlier today, his pocketbook copy of the U.S. Constitution. And of course, the 25th Amendment has to deal with presidential disability and succession. And in the case of the removal of the president from office or of his death or resignation, the vice president shall become president. What would this entail? How many members of the cabinet would have to vote in favor? What's the process?
We don't know where exactly each cabinet member is here on this process, but it would have to be something that would have to be formally presented, and that's why I set the table by saying it has not been presented to the vice president yet that these proceedings would be getting underway. My understanding is there's conversation to try to build some level of quorum before that happens. We also know that, just based on the vice president and the events of the day, he has not been able to be in contact with many people. We know that he was the one who was in contact with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, for example, to help to activate the National Guard and talk about how to handle the violence in the streets. But basic contact between cabinet members, it has been somewhat limited today. So the procedures are what we need to be working on today, how this would actually play out. But I also want to underscore that the rest of the world is watching this very carefully. We have leaders of authoritarian systems, of dictatorships and democracies condemning what is happening in the U.S. Capitol right now, and that is not lost. That embarrassment is not lost on many high-level officials, cabinet members who also have political hopes for themselves in the future.
Today was heartbreaking, and I was shaken to the core as I thought about the people I met in China and Russia and Afghanistan and Iraq and other places who yearn for freedom and who look to this building and these shores as a place of hope. And I saw the images being broadcast around the world, and it breaks my heart. I have 25 grandchildren. Many of them were watching TV, thinking about this building, whether their grandpa was okay. I knew I was okay. I must tell you as well, I was proud to serve with these men and women. This is an extraordinary group of people. I'm proud to be a member of the United States Senate and meet with people of integrity as we do here today. Now we gather due to a selfish man's injured pride and the outrage of supporters who he has deliberately misinformed for the past 2 months and stirred to action this very morning. What happened here today was an insurrection incited by the President of the United States. Those who choose to continue to support his dangerous gambit by objecting to the results of a legitimate democratic election will forever be seen as being complicit in an unprecedented attack against our democracy. Fairly or not, they'll be remembered for their role in this shameful episode in American history. That will be their legacy. I salute Senator Langford and Loeffler and Braun and Daines, and I'm sure others, who in the light of today's outrage have withdrawn their objection. For any who remain insistent on an audit in order to satisfy the many people who believe that the election was stolen, I'd offer this perspective. No congressional audit is ever going to convince these voters, particularly when the president will continue to say that the election was stolen. The best way we can show respect for the voters who are upset is by telling them the truth. That's the burden. That's the duty of leadership. The truth is that President-elect Biden won the election. President Trump lost. I've had that experience. No fun. Scores of courts, the president's own attorney general, state election officials, both Republican and Democrat, have reached that unequivocal decision. And in light of today's sad circumstances, I asked my colleague, do we weigh our own political fortunes more heavily than we weigh the strength of our republic, the strength of our democracy, and the cause of freedom? What's the weight of personal acclaim compared to the weight of conscience? Leader McConnell said that the vote today is the most important in his 36 years of public service. Think of that. Authorizing 2 wars, voting on 2 impeachments. He said that not because the vote reveals something about the election, it's because this vote reveals something about us. I urge my colleagues to move forward with completing the electoral count, to refrain from further objections, and to unanimously affirm the legitimacy of the presidential election. Thank you, Mr. President.
Democratic. I refuse to let anyone intent on instigating chaos or inciting violence deter me from carrying out my constitutional duties. You know, when my Army buddies and I raised our right hands, when the 45,000 troops in Arizona raised their right hands and swore to protect and defend the Constitution, we did not qualify our oath by saying that we'd follow orders only when the commander-in-chief was someone whose election we were happy with. Just like when every senator in this chamber was sworn into office, we didn't mutter under our breath that we discharge our duties only when it served our political interests or helped us to avoid the wrath of a petty, insecure, wannabe tin-pot dictator on the precipice of losing power and relevance. No, there is no ambiguity here. Joe Biden won the election with a record number of votes. Republican officials nationwide confirmed those results, including in Arizona, as has judge after Trump-appointed judge. Even Trump's attorney general admitted that the United States Department of Justice had not found widespread fraud that would have affected the outcome. Yet still, many of my Republican colleagues are asking us to ignore all of that. With no evidence of their own, they're asking us to ignore court rulings, ignore Republican election officials, and even worse, ignore the will of the people across this vast, great nation. By trying to overturn this election, they are placing more trust in Reddit conspiracy theories over the Constitution, proving that appeasing Trump is more important to them than protecting the most basic tenet of our republic, the adherence to free and fair elections. If there's one thing I know, it's that my troops didn't sign up to defend our democracy in war zones thousands of miles away, only to watch it crumble in these hallowed halls here at home.
Senator, I have to ask you about the state of our nation, the security of our nation. There are reports that a number of the president's national security advisors are considering resigning. Margaret Brennan, our moderator of Face the Nation, has reported there are cabinet members who are considering invoking the 25th Amendment. And there are press reports that the president, in the words of Maggie Haberman of the New York Times, has lost it. He has said he will not concede. Are you concerned, and would you support an effort by some of your House colleagues to move forward with a second impeachment trial in the final 2 weeks of the Trump presidency?
Well, look, Nora, this is a moment of great peril for our nation. We have a president who's demonstrated an unhinged allegiance to a conspiracy theory in which he actually won the election that he lost 2 months ago. I think we cannot coddle this leader any further. I think we cannot tolerate the sorts of actions he took that led to today any further. And we need to take the steps that will be effective in the next 2 weeks.
You think he should be removed from office? You think he should be removed from office?
My hope is that his cabinet, his vice president, his closest advisors will move him along and get him to accept the outcome of the election that happened 2 months ago. Nor, I'll remind you, in the last 2 months, he's ignored a raging pandemic and he's fueled the fires of division. He's mostly tweeted and indulged himself and golfed. He has utterly abandoned his post as president in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of a Russian hack of our national security systems. He doesn't deserve the presidency anymore, and we need to do what we can to ensure a peaceful, stable transition to President-elect Joe Biden.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Mr. President, myself, members of the Georgia delegation, and some 74 of my Republican colleagues and I object to the electoral votes from the state of Georgia on the grounds that the election conducted on November 3rd was faulty and fraudulent due to unilateral actions by the Secretary of State to unlawfully change the state's election process without approval from the General Assembly, and thereby setting the stage for an unprecedented amount of fraud and irregularities. And I have signed the objection myself.
Sections 15 and 17 of Title III of the United States Code require that any objection be presented in writing and signed by a member of the House of Representatives and a senator. Is the objection in writing and signed by a member and a senator?
Mr. President, prior to the actions and events of today, we did, but following the events of today, it appears that some senators have withdrawn their objection.
The only question that remains is this: will this House reaffirm our fidelity to our democracy, or will we end it? I must concede, Madam Speaker, I have been naive about one subject. I always just assumed our democracy would naturally endure, almost as if it was predestined. I never even questioned it until the last several years. 2 centuries ago, one of our founding fathers cautioned against this notion. John Adams wrote, "Remember, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There was never a democracy yet that did not commit suicide." I now realize the wisdom of his words. Never again will I take for granted our democracy. It must be jealously defended by every generation, always.
The fact is, Madam Speaker, the fact is that at the end of the day, people...
Gentleman from Virginia. Gentleman will say this point of order.
Gentleman will say his point of order.
Yes, ma'am. Point of order. The gentleman said that there were lies on this floor here today, looking over this direction. I ask that those words be taken down. We may have a disagreement on a... on matters, but
Mr. Rand, it's not timely.
This side of the aisle liars.
No, the gentleman's name was not timely. You didn't register an appropriate time. The gentleman will proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the fact is that at the end of the day...
Yeah, look, you say that about me every single day. So
the truth hurts.
Hold your tongue. The gentleman will proceed.
It hurts.
Okay.
It hurts them. It hurts this country. It hurts all of us. But the fact is that the people have made it by not giving in. Go ahead, shout it out. Say
The gentleman is not in order. The gentleman will proceed. The gentleman will proceed.
One last thing to say, Madam Speaker, and I thank you for your patience. All people need to know, all they need to know tonight, Madam Speaker,
There'll be order in the House. There'll be order in the House. There'll be order in the House. The gentleman will clear this chamber. The gentleman will clear the chamber. Gentleman will proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The truth hurts. But the fact is this. We want this government to work more than they want it to fail. And after everything that's happened today, we want that more than ever. Know that, the people watching at home. We want this government to work. We will make it work. They will not make it fail. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
Thank you, John.
Sir, does the President have some responsibility for what happened today?
Mr. Vice President, does the President need to speak up more forcefully against what happened today?